What happens to your future when world leaders treat nuclear agreements like yesterday's shopping lists, tossed aside without a second thought? It might seem like the stuff of distant summits and headline news, but this crisis is already closer than you realize. Imagine waking up in a world where the very promises that kept nuclear dangers at bay for generations have been quietly erased. When Russia, with a simple yet chilling administrative act, deletes a single line from a decades-old pact with the United States, an agreement painstakingly crafted to keep dozens of tons of weapons-grade plutonium out of reach, this is not a mere technical adjustment. It is a deliberate signal, one with the power to shake the foundations of global security. These official gestures, seemingly dry and bureaucratic, are not harmless rituals. Each one is a warning flare, a clear sign of broken promises, self-interest overriding the common good, and alliances that have grown brittle with mistrust. The invisible barrier protecting your everyday life, built from decades of trust and handshake diplomacy, can dissolve in a single moment, leaving you exposed to dangers you thought had been banished to history books. Behind the polished headlines, superpowers are making quiet, ruthless calculations. The old rules, born from the ashes of the Second World War and codified during the tense days of the Cold War, are fading. Today's priorities are brutally pragmatic: profit, power, and survival. As treaties crumble, the aftershocks ripple outwards. Energy costs surge beyond what any household budget can bear. Global markets teeter, with the flicker of a headline sending entire sectors into panic. The sense of safety that once seemed guaranteed begins to unravel, thread by thread. Ignore these political shifts, and you risk waking up in a world where your savings, your comfort, and even your security become expendable chips on a table run by leaders who no longer care about keeping their word. When trust collapses at the top, ordinary people bear the consequences, sometimes in ways that are impossible to predict until it is far too late to prepare. So how did we get here? When did strategic partnerships, once celebrated with grand ceremonies and historic signatures, turn into disposable paperwork? And why does this quiet crisis matter for you, sitting thousands of miles from the negotiating table? To understand today's unraveling, we need to trace the rise and fall of nuclear diplomacy. Let's revisit the moment these agreements were forged, and why their collapse now changes everything, not just for diplomats in distant capitals, but for all of us. Once, treaties meant something. They were the bedrock of global order, hammered out through grueling negotiations, late-night phone calls, and the hard-won trust between rivals. Now, they are just poker chips on a global table, tossed in and discarded when convenient. As the new millennium began, an era that many hoped would bring peace and stability, Russia and the United States announced a bold pact. Each would eliminate 34 tons of weapons-grade plutonium. For context, that is enough fissile material to build thousands of nuclear bombs. Both countries invested billions, drawing up complex blueprints and timelines. There were ribbon-cutting ceremonies, press releases, and the hope that two former adversaries could become true partners. The logic was clear. If the two greatest nuclear powers could work together to reduce the threat, perhaps nuclear terror itself might finally recede. But the American promise collapsed. Despite elaborate plans, the United States never completed the facility it pledged to build. Russia, in contrast, followed through, pouring in years of effort and mountains of cash. Moscow built the infrastructure, hired the scientists, and kept to the schedule, while Washington dragged its feet, expecting Moscow to shoulder the burden alone. Patience snapped. By the year 2016, Russia suspended the deal. With a single signature, decades of fragile trust vanished. The message was unmistakable. This was not just about a few tons of plutonium. It was about the unraveling of mutual respect, the glue that once kept nuclear dangers in check. What grew in that void? Pragmatism masked as principle. The United States repackaged its plutonium as a green fuel for civilian energy, touting it as an environmental breakthrough. But the real motive was sharper. Win the race for global nuclear fuel supremacy and edge Russia out of the market, all beneath a veneer of sustainability. Private companies rushed in. Oklo and Nucleo, names that might once have sounded like futuristic tech startups, or perhaps even household appliance brands, are now at the heart of nuclear's future. Security is no longer just the business of presidents or diplomats. Now, it is tangled with shareholders, contracts, and profit margins. In the new order, money and competition trump national safety. This is the real danger. When trust between governments dies and nuclear stewardship becomes a contest for revenue, the risks explode. Who truly controls the world's most dangerous materials? Elected leaders or corporate boards? As lines blur, the public pays the price. Energy markets grow more chaotic, and plutonium once kept under lock and key is now a commodity, traded with little transparency or restraint. This is not distant statecraft. The breakdown of nuclear trust strikes at everyone's safety, wallets, and sense of security. What was once hidden behind diplomatic handshakes now directly shapes the costs and risks of daily life. But how did nuclear materials become just another asset in the global marketplace? The answer lies in a tangled web of politics, profit, and ambition. A web that has ensnared governments, corporations, and ordinary people alike. What if America's real weakness is not on the battlefield, but in its balance sheets? The world's most powerful nation is now running on debt, not strength. Its greatest vulnerability is economic exhaustion, a silent threat that grows each month, unremarked by those too focused on headlines about military maneuvers or new technologies. The numbers are staggering. The United States now spends more just to cover interest payments on its national debt than it does on its entire military. Every single month, Washington borrows sums that nearly match what Russia spends on its entire defense budget in a year. This is not to build or innovate, but simply to fund basic programs and maintain the appearance of global dominance. America's power projection is now fueled by IOUs, not by real productivity or savings. Dependency on endless borrowing has quietly replaced genuine responsibility. The United States expands costly promises to allies, finances distant conflicts, and grows social safety nets, even as its debt spirals out of control. The illusion of strength survives, but it teeters atop a mountain of unpaid bills. Meanwhile, rival powers are adapting. Russia and China are abandoning the old playbook. They are forming new alliances, investing in self-sufficiency, and living within, or far closer to, their means. In this emerging landscape, financial stability itself is a form of power, and the West's economic recklessness is a glaring weakness. The Western response is not reform, but escalation. Sanctions, engineered unrest, and rapid military buildups are deployed to buy time, to squeeze out a few more years of dominance. Each move increases short-term leverage, but adds to long-term risk. Each act of pressure is paid for with more borrowed money and diminishing returns. As the debt climbs, the ability to enforce global rules begins to fracture. When the economic bedrock is unsound, the authority to dictate terms slips away. The Western-led order looks brittle as rivals grow bolder and begin to openly challenge the old system. If our global order is built on unsustainable debt, then its collapse will not be contained to financial markets. The shock will ripple outward, destabilizing security pacts, disrupting energy supplies, and sending food and fuel prices soaring into every household. As trust evaporates and balance sheets dictate every move, technology and raw displays of force have become the last fallback. The era of negotiation and shared rules is fading, replaced by a world where power is asserted, not discussed. But beneath these high-stakes maneuvers, a quieter crisis is brewing. The collapse of mutual trust is now reaching even the world's most dangerous weapons. When ghosts with nuclear engines drift overhead, who truly holds the keys to tomorrow? Russia's public reveal of a new generation of nuclear-powered cruise missiles is not just a display of military might. It is a warning, a promise that the rules have changed. These missiles cross continents, defy interception, and render borders meaningless. They shatter assumptions about distance, deterrence, and defense. Western governments reel in response. Security frameworks built over decades now seem hopelessly outdated, their foundations shaken by technologies that ignore both treaties and taboos. What once felt solid, lines on maps, promises inked on paper, now feels like brittle glass, splintering under the weight of new realities. The last pillars of arms control are collapsing. Treaties that once bound rivals together, offering stability through mutual restraint, are being torn up, left to expire, or deliberately breached. Without these guardrails, the world teeters on the edge of a new arms race, one that is already quietly underway. The absence of rules does not just permit danger, it invites it. Misunderstandings can now ignite into disaster with consequences that cannot be contained. For Europe, the loss of predictability brings a cold anxiety. In Brussels, in Berlin, leaders watch the old order dissolve, counting the days until deterrence fails. Across the continent, ordinary people are forced to face a terrifying question. What if the system that kept the peace breaks down, and nothing is left to replace it? Meanwhile, the United States steps back from idealism, embracing a hard-nosed, transactional approach. Deals are struck and abandoned according to the logic of immediate gain. If peace is no longer profitable, then peace becomes expendable. The new rule is simple. Every decision must pay, or it is discarded. Caught in the crossfire are millions of ordinary lives. Superpower chess games and corporate interests ripple through daily existence. Energy insecurity becomes a personal burden. A cold home, a higher bill, a job lost to market shocks. Financial stability slips through fingers as economies shudder and uncertainty reigns. The anxiety of tomorrow is no longer distant. It is felt in every household, every paycheck, every sleepless night. Without trust, without rules, the world faces a new normal defined by risk and volatility. Escalation and miscalculation are no longer rare events. They have become the background noise of daily life. Every crisis, every diplomatic stumble, every technological leap is now a potential spark in a room full of dry tinder. The stakes are no longer abstract. They are immediate, personal, and impossible to ignore. As the old world order unravels, what emerges in its place is not yet clear. But the consequences are already rippling outward, reshaping lives and futures alike. What does it feel like to wake up in your own city and realize the heat is gone, the lights are out, not because of a storm passing overhead, but because of decisions made a continent away? For millions of Ukrainians, this is daily life. Winter turns into a struggle for survival as energy flows thin and attacks on the grid turn entire neighborhoods into frozen, powerless zones. People line up for water, pack into makeshift shelters, or scour the markets for generators, knowing that help from the state is never guaranteed. Government officials appear on television, urging entire communities to evacuate, yet their own offices remain warm, protected by special infrastructure. As public services break down and daily routines unravel, the gulf between leaders and ordinary families grows painfully clear. The foreign aid you once counted on is now a fading echo, replaced by a stark lesson in self-reliance. The grand language of diplomacy and war, so often recited on news broadcasts, translates into cold apartments, endless blackouts, and a relentless fight to meet your most basic needs. Suddenly, global politics is no longer about handshakes or treaties. It is about whether you will stay warm tonight, whether you will have light to read by, or clean water to drink. As this harsh reality sets in, the psychological toll becomes undeniable. Laughter, once shared through dark humor and community spirit, grows scarce. Hope withers, replaced by a quiet, gnawing despair. Every flicker of a lamp or burst of heat becomes a reminder. Your comfort, your safety, even your survival, now depend on distant power struggles you neither see nor control. This is no longer a distant news story. It is your day-to-day existence, shaped by forces playing for influence and profit far above your head. Energy, food, and shelter have become luxuries, determined not by your effort, but by the unpredictable outcomes of global rivalries and betrayals. In this new era, the erosion of trust and the rise of chaos are not just abstract ideas. They have become urgent, personal, and real. For millions, every blackout is a message. The old rules are gone. The security you believed in is slipping away, replaced by a world where survival is no longer a given, but a daily test. It is not just Ukraine. These pressures are spreading, reshaping the lives of ordinary people everywhere as the global order fractures and old safeguards vanish. The era of nuclear trust is shattered. Are you ready for the age of consequences? With Russia's formal exit from the plutonium disposition accord, the last fragile threads of global good faith have snapped. A quarter-century ago, the world's nuclear guardians at least pretended to act responsibly. Now, that illusion is gone, replaced by the sharp glare of unsparing reality. This is not just a matter of treaties and signatures. It is about the unraveling of a system where the powerful once agreed, at least on paper, to play by shared rules. Today, superpowers tear up their pledges with a single flourish. The collateral damage falls not on distant diplomats, but on you, your wallet, your safety, your sense of tomorrow. Every broken promise, every fresh loophole ratchets up the risk for ordinary people. Surging prices, power outages, and financial shocks are no longer distant possibilities. They have become the new normal, unleashed by decisions made in distant capitals where your voice does not count. When the United States and Russia walk away from nuclear deals, the message is stark. Trust is dead, and those who yearn for stability will be left disappointed. The old dream of a cooperative, safe world has evaporated. The age of polite diplomacy is over, and the consequences are already seeping into your daily life. Today's nuclear arena is no longer just a contest between governments. It is a battleground of cash-strapped states and profit-hungry corporations. Private firms are handed access to the world's most dangerous materials. The line between civilian use and military leverage has blurred. Accountability has vanished into boardrooms and classified briefings. If you ignore these shifting alliances and dissolving boundaries, you are letting others gamble with your future behind closed doors. No one will guard your interests if you do not demand it. The fantasy of nuclear goodwill has collapsed. Now, each disruption in the global order is a toss of the dice with your security, your livelihood, and your ability to plan for what comes next. Here is the urgent call. Pay attention. Demand real answers. Refuse to accept platitudes from leaders who keep changing the rules. If you settle for silence, you become a bystander to your own fate. And the price may be steeper than you ever imagined. But as we peer into the uncertainties ahead, let's take a closer look at how this collapse of trust could reshape the world you live in, not just in the abstract, but in everyday reality. Consider, for example, the story of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. Signed in the early 1970s, when tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union threatened to spiral out of control, this treaty placed strict limits on missile defense systems. The logic was mutual vulnerability would act as a brake on reckless escalation. The moment the United States withdrew from the treaty in 2002, this logic was upended. Russia responded by investing in hypersonic weapons and mobile missile systems, triggering a new arms technology race that continues to this day. Each side rationalized its actions as necessary, but with every treaty torn up, the world grew less predictable and more dangerous. Or think of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, a keystone agreement that eliminated an entire class of missiles from Europe. When it collapsed in 2019, European leaders scrambled to reassure nervous citizens. But overnight, cities from Warsaw to Paris once again found themselves within range of fast-striking, hard-to-intercept weapons. The sense of security that had lasted for decades evaporated. Proof that the death of trust at the top can ripple into fear on the street. In practical terms, these broken agreements do not just affect soldiers or diplomats. They touch the price of gas at your local station, the cost of heating your home, and even the job market. When Russia's invasion of Ukraine led to sanctions and tit-for-tat energy embargoes, the global price of natural gas soared. In Germany, factories that had relied on affordable Russian gas shut down, laying off thousands of workers. In the United Kingdom, families were forced to choose between paying for food or heating, a direct result of geopolitical rivalry turning into economic pain. If we look to history for guidance, the lesson is clear. When the world's great powers abandon rules, the consequences are rarely contained. In the years before the First World War, secret alliances and broken promises set the stage for a conflict that engulfed the world. In the 1930s, the collapse of arms control treaties like the Washington Naval Treaty and the failure of the League of Nations allowed aggressive powers to rearm unchecked, paving the way for the Second World War. Each time, ordinary people suffered most, caught in the crossfire of ambitions they did not choose and cannot control. Today, new scenarios play out with unsettling familiarity. Imagine a future where a sudden crisis, perhaps a cyber attack on a nuclear facility, or a miscommunication during a military exercise, escalates beyond control because there are no longer trusted hotlines or shared protocols. In such a world, even a small accident or provocation could spark a cascade of retaliation, with consequences that leap across borders and time zones. An incident in the Baltic Sea could shut down energy pipelines to Western Europe, plunging cities into darkness. Trade routes could be disrupted by a single naval skirmish, emptying supermarket shelves and driving up food prices within days. So what can be done? Is it possible to rebuild trust in a world where every handshake is suspect and every promise is seen as a temporary convenience? First, transparency must return to the heart of diplomacy. The most successful arms control agreements in history, from the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaties to the Nunn-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, succeeded because each side could verify compliance. Satellite imagery, on-site inspections, and shared data built confidence, slowly, imperfectly, but meaningfully. Without verification, every deal becomes a dead letter the moment it is signed. Second, citizens must demand accountability from their leaders, both political and corporate. In the 1980s, the global anti-nuclear movement forced governments to freeze and reduce arsenals, not through violence, but through persistent, organized pressure. Today, similar activism can demand that nuclear stewardship not be outsourced to the highest bidder, but managed with the seriousness it deserves. Third, economic resilience must be rebuilt from the ground up. If the West's greatest vulnerability is debt, then it is time to rethink priorities. Investments in domestic industry, energy independence, and fiscal responsibility are not just economic choices. They are acts of national security. If governments continue to mortgage the future for short-term gains, the cycle of crisis will only accelerate. Fourth, education and public engagement must become priorities. For too long, nuclear issues have seemed technical, distant, and the exclusive domain of experts. Yet the risks are universal. Schools, universities, and media must make these issues accessible, so that every citizen understands the stakes and can participate in the debate. Finally, practical contingency planning should become part of everyday life. Communities can invest in local energy solutions, such as solar microgrids or community heating projects, to buffer against disruptions. Families can prepare for blackouts and shortages, not out of paranoia, but as a rational response to an unpredictable world. Local governments can build networks of mutual aid, ensuring that the vulnerable are not left behind when the next shock arrives. The path forward will not be easy. The erosion of trust is far simpler than its restoration. But history shows that periods of chaos are often followed by renewal, if people refuse to be passive, if they demand better from those in power, and if they rebuild the habits of cooperation from the bottom up. So, as you listen to the next news report about a treaty collapse, a new missile test, or another round of sanctions, ask yourself, what can you do to protect your future, your family, your community, your country? The age of consequences is here, but so too is the opportunity to decide what comes next. In the end, the lesson is simple. When the structures of trust are dismantled, the costs are borne not by those who sign the papers, but by those who live with the results. The world you inherit is shaped by the choices made today. Pay attention, speak out, prepare. The price of silence is too high to pay.